So in this tutorial I want to show you how to work a project in the round using one of my patterns where you have the instructions for working flat. When you work in the round you will skip a few stitches and then you will not have this seam in the fabric, so the fabric will be continuous. This is a great solution for when you have a stitch repeat like this one. This is 14 stitches and you can use that stitch repeat to make your project in the round in a tube like this, or you can work with increases and decreases as well throughout the project. I will have a separate tutorial on how to join two pieces and then to work in the round when you work flat for a part of the project for each side. So stay tuned for that tutorial if you're interested. But for this one, I want to show you how to take a pattern that was written for working flat and turn it into a pattern that can be worked in the round. To do this, you will need 2 balls of yarn. I have here the same color. The pattern will be simple. It will have a honeycomb section like in this one, and then a stitch pattern of hearts. These are peaches, not hearts, but that one will have hearts made with Tunisian reverse stitches and knit stitches for the rest of the fabric. The reason why I'm not showing you a lace pattern is because of this yarn. It doesn't look so good in lace, so I decided to make a new pattern with reverse stitches. And what's nice in Tunisian crochet worked in the round is that when you use reverse stitches and knit stitches in the same pattern, you can do color work designs using that technique. If you make lace patterns, of course, you will probably want to use the same color for the forward and the return pass as well, because the lace can get lost easily in a mix of colors of yarn. And even this is a bit much for me. I would have preferred this whole thing to be a smoother gradient, but if you get variegated yarn like this, try to get the colors to not have a lot of contrast between them. Or if you use 2 colors of yarn, you want less contrast for lace, more contrast for what I'm about to show you, working with reverse stitches. Besides the 2 colors of yarn, you will also need a double-ended hook. You can have a double-ended hook with a cord, an interchangeable double-ended hook, or you can use a plain straight double-ended hook. It doesn't matter how long the hook is for double-ended work. You just put as many stitches on it as you can, and then you bind them off. This kind of hook has the same size of hooks on either end. This is a 6mm from Pony. It's a metal one. The bigger ones are made of plastic, so I don't recommend them. And these are wood Knit Pro, and I only have one set, so this one, the forward pass hook, is a 6mm hook, and the return pass hook is a 5.5. If, like me, you have a set of interchangeables, you want to use the bigger hook for the forward pass and a slightly smaller hook for the return pass. Now, I already did the casting on for the forward pass. You have different methods of casting on. I chose the chain method. Unlike the projects where you work flat and you need a first and last stitch, in the round you will not have a first and last stitch. The first stitch on the hook will be the first stitch of the first pattern repeat, and the last stitch on the hook will be the last stitch of the pattern repeat. To figure out how many stitches or loops you need to cast on the hook for the first round, you have to look at the pattern you're following. If you have a stitch pattern like here, with a multiple of 14 for example, and you want to make a size that has 8 repeats, you will need to have 112 loops on the hook, which means that you either chain 111 and pick up 111 loops, you will have 112, or you cast on 112 using any method that you like, and I have a separate video that shows you how to cast on loops on the hook for the foundation row. Now, once you have all of these loops on the hook, you need to start the return pass. We will do the return pass with the second end. So we leave this for now and turn the work and bring all the loops to the end of this hook. we pick up the second yarn. And you can make a slip knot on this yarn just to secure it so that it doesn't pass through the first loop. Put it on the hook and slip it through the first stitch. And then yarn over, pull through 2 until you reach the other end. And of course, if you have a shorter hook, you need to keep picking up loops on the other end and then casting them off. Normally, Tunisian crochet designers recommend to leave 3 loops on the forward pass hook. So when you have 3 loops, you continue picking up stitches. You will notice that you are working on the back of the work when doing the return pass. This is the front that looks like simple stitches in the foundation row. Now we have 3 loops left on the hook. And we move all the loops to the first hook. For now, we don't have anything worked in the round. And we need to join so that we can work in the round. Make sure that the first row is not twisted. And then, using the first yarn, or the forward pass yarn, we pick up a loop in the first stitch of the previous row. So we go with the hook behind the first loop here and pick up a loop. Now I'm going to make a honeycomb pattern for a few rows. So the next stitch is a purl stitch, and we pick up stitches as usual, as if working in the foundation row that is worked flat. And you can work for half of this piece with no problems, or even more. And if you want to have fewer stitches, you can move to the end, the other hook, to do the return pass. Now, what's important here? You want to put a stitch marker in this first stitch so that you don't miss the beginning of the row. Here, there will be a tiny seam at the end of the project so that we close this gap between the first and last stitch of the first row. So this is the first stitch here, and I will put a stitch marker into it. You can move the stitch marker up with every row, or you can leave it here and add a new stitch marker on the next row, depending on how many stitch markers you have and how easy it is for you to work with them. So, as before, we use the return pass yarn to just yarn over, pull through 2 until there are 3 loops left on the hook. The return pass goes quite easily because the loops are bigger due to the bigger hook. So when you have 3 loops, you go back. And switch the yarn back to the forward pass yarn. And continue like this until you finish the round. And in my case, I will make a few rounds, I think 8, and then I will begin the textured pattern with the hearts, and I will show you that as well. And it's good to have many stitch markers available so that it's easy for you to see where a stitch pattern begins and where it ends, and then it's easy to keep track of where you are as well. So I will see you after I make the 8 rounds. There will be 8 rounds in total, so 1 is the foundation, and then 7 more rounds with the honeycomb stitch, and then I will make 1 round in simple stitch, and then we can start the pattern. As you know, in Tunisian crochet, working in the forward pass modifies the stitches in the row below, or round in this case, in the round below, which is why I will have the 7 rows in the honeycomb pattern and the 8th row with simple stitches, so we can start with the uniform round This also works the same for lace patterns. Usually I like to add the honeycomb border on top and bottom, but if you're working body of a sweater or tank top or even a skirt, you will probably not have that honeycomb section, and you will start directly with the lace or textured pattern. Now the honeycomb section is finished, and if you're doing it the same way as I am, you will notice that there will be two of the same stitch one next to the other, and that can be helped unless you add an extra stitch in the beginning, because the honeycomb stitch is a repeat of 2 stitches and 2 rows. If you want to use the honeycomb stitch in the round, then start with 1 extra stitch, and then you can work nice and smoothly or all around, but I didn't do that. You would also have to decrease this stitch before you start the stitch pattern. So I printed out the chart for the pattern that I'm going to use to make this cowl in the round, and you will have access to this on the blog where I will publish the pattern, so you can follow along with me if you want to. This is the Tunisian reverse stitch, and this is the Tunisian knit stitch. I made them colorful so that they're easy to see. If you use 2 colors, this color for the knit stitch will be the forward pass, and this color will be the return pass. Now, I also prepared some stitch markers to mark the first stitch in each repeat, and they are a different color from the stitch marker that I used to mark the first stitch in the row, because this way I can keep track of the rows. The stitch pattern is 14 stitches wide, and we begin with 1 reverse stitch, and then we have 13 knit stitches. If you don't know how to make a reverse stitch, check out the tutorial on this channel for how to do that. And we are using the yarn for the forward pass. So that's 1 reverse stitch and then 13 knit stitches. All you have to do is look at the stitch and insert the hook between the 2 vertical bars, and then pick up a loop. It's best to move the stitch marker to the first stitch here until you get a good grip of the pattern. So we have 1 reverse stitch, 4 knit stitches, 13, and another reverse stitch. We put a stitch marker in, and make 13 knit stitches, and so on. I will meet you at the end of the row when we do the return pass. So now I reached the end of the forward pass that I can do, because I still have a few stitches to do the return pass on from the previous row. And we have the stitch markers here. So we turn the work, or glide the work, and pick up the return pass yarn and start the return pass. And if you want to here, you can go back to the forward pass and finish the row. And we're back to the beginning of the next row, where we will read the second row in the pattern. But first I have to finish the return pass. Now the stitches are almost all bound off with the return pass, and we can start on the second row of the pattern, which consists of 2 reverse stitches, 5 knit stitches, 1 reverse, 5 knit, 1 reverse. And the first one goes into the first stitch from the previous row. So that's 1 reverse stitch, move the stitch marker, and 2, then 5 knit stitches, one reverse stitch, 5 knit stitches, and 1 reverse stitch. Again, we have the 2 reverse stitches, and we move the stitch marker to the corresponding loop here. So that's 1 and 2, and we continue like this around. You can see that the pattern is already starting to show up. There is a little star here, and then the hearts, and the bottom of the hearts is showing up here. So I will make a few more rows like this, and I will show you how to bind off. And also, if these ends bother you, I left them quite long. You don't need to leave them this long. I will also show you how to bind these off so that they don't bother you. So you only need one of the ends to bind off here, and we will create an invisible stitch. You can open the slip knot that we began with. So one of these belongs to the foundation chain, and one of them belongs to the return pass yarn. So I unraveled the slip knot from the return pass yarn, and I will weave this in on the back. And I will do the same with the forward pass yarn. You want to use the forward pass yarn because that's the one that shows up on the bottom of the work. Pass it through a tapestry needle. And then look at the edge of the fabric here. You have some chains here, and you want to replicate them with the tail. So we go under the chain on the other side of the gap, and we go here under the chain on the first side of the gap. Now we go back through this chain, and this is not an entirely invisible join, but it's close to invisible. And that's all you need to do, and the rest you can weave in on the back of the work. And I have a tutorial here on YouTube in which I show you how to weave in your ends in Tunisian crochet. I will link that here in the cards and in the description. This is what you get if you continue working in the pattern for the hearts. This is one pattern repeat so far, and I will make a few more, and you will find this pattern on the blog so you can make your own if you want to. After completing the last forward pass and the last return pass with the 3 loops left on the hook, you want to bind off. In my case, I made 2 repeats of the stitch pattern and then another section of honeycomb stitch. Now you can bind off like this, or you can finish the return pass. And return to the first hook. And we can start doing the bind off with this last loop of the return pass and the yarn from the forward pass. In most cases you will be using the forward pass yarn because you have more of it. I have noticed that the return pass yarn gets used up faster than the forward pass yarn. So to bind off, we do it just like when working flat. We continue in pattern, but instead of picking up the loop on the hook, we slip it. And here you can also disconnect the end of the hook. In my case, this is the cable, so that it doesn't drag you down. And all that you do is continue in pattern and slip the stitch, going all around until you reach the beginning of the row and this return pass thread. After finishing the last stitch, we snip the yarn, leaving a long tail. For both the forward and return pass yarns, and we pull the yarn through the last loop and pick up a tapestry needle to finish off that small seam. As you can see, this looks like a few knots here, so we will try to create another one of these teardrop shapes or V's by going under the first full one that we can see, and then back in the originating spot and through the fabric to the back of the work. Like this. Now we have a nice smooth edge, and then we can weave in the ends on the back just like before. And the project is finished, and you can give it a bath and a nice blocking. Just make sure that you don't flatten out these stitches. You will see the texture the best when you have a sideways source of light, so the shadow from the motifs makes them stand out. If you turn the cowl inside out, you also have these motifs, but they are made in Tunisian pearl stitch. And if you want them to stand out just like on the front, but made with Tunisian knit stitches, I have a tutorial here on the channel on how to make the Tunisian reverse pearl knit stitch, which looks like knit stitches on the back. So if you're interested in that, there are two videos. One shows you how to make the stitch, and one shows you how to work it in this kind of stitch pattern. It looks best with two colors, and it does squash the motifs a bit, so be aware of that. The yarn also plays a role. This is cotton and this is wool with acrylic, and you can see that the stitches have a different proportion depending on the material that the yarn is made from. When working in the round, you don't only have to work straight like this, you can also add increases. This is an example of a t-shirt made in the round, and there are increases here in the lace pattern, so you can do a lot of shaping. Also there are decreases here in the round. So you can play with this technique of Tunisian crochet in the round with a double-ended hook and make a lot of shapes. You can also work flat, and I will have separate tutorials for how to do that. One at least for a circle, and then there are other creators who have made tutorials for making a square or a hexagon in the round with a double-ended hook, and I will link those in the description. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And if you want to find out when I publish more similar tutorials about Tunisian crochet or regular crochet, subscribe to this channel and to my email updates, and I will announce when those are available. I thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.